Hi everyone, it's Brian here, and it does seem to be a little while since I did a behind the camera video. It seems ages ago since I did one of those, but I wanted to do it today because there is a particular deck that I wanted to discuss with you, and the clue is in what you can see before you. It is, of course, the wonderful re-released Gill Tarot, which I have lusted after for a very long time and now finally have in my hands, which is fantastic. But I wanted to do a little bit more than a walkthrough with you. There are other walkthroughs on YouTube and very good walkthroughs, so I thought rather than just do another one of those, I would go into a little bit more depth about this deck, and in particular go into the fact that despite it not necessarily being terribly obvious at first, this is actually a strongly Kabbalistic deck, certainly very influenced by Kabbalah, and I know that a million brains now are, well, not a million. One day a million people will watch my videos, but probably not today. But certainly many brains out there will be going, oh, Kabbalah, no thanks. Too complicated, too confusing, don't understand it, too dark. Kabbalistic decks are dark. And other brains will be going, yay, Kabbalah, how exciting, how wonderful, how much information we can glean from Kabbalistic kind of references. But the thing about this deck, about the Gill Tarot, is that it is not dark. It is wonderfully colourful, and you'll see that in just a second. But I do understand that for some people, the very thought of going into Kabbalah is just too much, because it seems to be too complicated, and it does seem to be rather difficult. And so what I want to do in this video is, we'll talk a bit more about the guidebook in a second, but what I want to do in this video is, as well as going through the Gill Tarot with you, I want to compare it with one of the Kabbalistic decks that is often seen to be, or assumed to be, rather dark, and that is Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. And just to give ourselves a little bit more information on all things Kabbalistic, another new deck that I've got, new to me anyway, is the Kabbalistic Tarot, and I thought that the three of these would make for a rather interesting walkthrough, because as we go through these three decks together, focusing on the Gill Tarot, that's the one that I want to focus on, but going through these three decks together, you'll see the contrast and the comparison between a deck that's considered to be quite dark and esoteric and difficult to get into, with one that I think is actually very accessible and bright and light, but covers the same territory in many cases, and one which is a great teaching deck if you want to get to grips with where the tarot cards fit within Kabbalistic systems and so on. So those are the three decks we're going to look at: Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, Eugene Vinitsky and Frater North's Kabbalistic Tarot, and Elizabeth Josephine Gill's Gill Tarot. So let me clear the decks and get my decks laid out, and we'll begin. Okay, so now we have our three decks before us, and before we go on, I would like to just say a little bit about where you can get these decks. So I ordered the Kabbalistic Tarot from Etsy, and I'll put the link below so that you are able to acquire that if you would be interested. The Gill Tarot I ordered from a third-party seller at Amazon. I think it's currently available at a reasonable price from Blackwell Books in the UK and from US Games in the US, because it's US Games that have republished it. And Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, of course, is widely available from all good retailers, or at least from all good tarot retailers. The Kabbalistic Tarot, by the way, comes in this nice hard box with a lidded box and a certificate of authenticity inside it. It's a beautiful deck, very well produced, and there's a lovely little guidebook that goes with it and explains how the cards all fit together. So well worth getting if you're interested in learning more about Kabbalah and Tarot, and we'll look a bit more at that in a second. The Gill Tarot comes in this box, the picture of the chariot on the back of it, and it does come with a little white book, which is actually a very good little white book. There's quite a lot of information in there, certainly about the cards, and there's a little bit there about the background to the Gill Tarot and the structure of the Gill Tarot, and the way that it's based on the Tree of Life, and the fact that one of the approaches that Josephine Gill emphasises is that each of the different suits in this tarot relate to the different Kabbalistic worlds. So, and this is something that you see in the Kabbalistic Tarot as well, of course. So Atzilith, the archetypal level, which is where fire and wands relate. Bria, the emotional and creative level, that's cups and water. Did I say wands and water? I meant fire and wands. And water and cups for Bria. Yetzira, formative energy level, that's air, swords, mental activity. And Asiya, the physical level, earth and discs. So there's lots of information in the little guidebook. However, there is also an actual more in-depth book, which is well worth getting, about the Gill Tarot. This has actually not been out of print, strangely, as far as I'm aware, for a long time. So I got this quite a while ago, even though the deck has only just recently been republished. And there's lots of information in here. It is well worth dipping into. And in terms of Aleister Crowley's tarot, there are lots of different guidebooks, including Crowley's own. The one I recommend is this one, Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot by Lon Milo Duquette, and I think this is an absolutely excellent guide to the Thoth Tarot, and lots of other things as well. So well worth getting. Now, in terms of the Gill Tarot, let's start there, and I want to read you a little bit about what Elizabeth Josephine Gill says about the tarot, and this is in the guidebook, the introduction in the guidebook that the larger guidebook that I bought. And what I like about this is what she describes here is, or could be, my own description of what I think the tarot actually is. Because what she says is, this tarot is designed as a mirror, a series of pictures within which individuals can find their reflections. We are told, man, know thyself, and most esoteric systems, of which tarot is one, tell us to search within for enlightenment, while they offer clues to help us through. And she goes on to say that a clue, obviously in that sense, clues to help us through, clue, C-L-U-E, but she then goes on to say, a clue, C-L-E-W, is a ball of thread that guides us through a labyrinth. Many fairy stories tell of the clue, C-L-E-W, that is given by a wise woman to the king, prince or princess, and as the thread unwinds and snakes ahead, the seeker may find his or her way through the impenetrable forest by following after it. And she goes on to say that to be useful in one's search, a system has to offer the mirror aspect, where one may be helped to look at oneself as objectively as possible. And it must also offer a guide to lead one through the maze to the centre. So I like what she says about the tarot being a mirror and reflecting, the cards reflecting ourselves back to us. And that's certainly how I see tarot. I see it much more as a reflective tool than anything else, really. And for me, that's what tarot is most useful for. And so what this book is saying really resonates with me in terms of her approach to it. She then goes on to talk about the structure that she's based the tarot on, and this is why it relates to these two decks, because it is based on Kabbalah. She says, I have based this tarot structure on the Tree of Life, which you will find pictured on the card backs. That's the card back. In its traditional colours. In using this, I am following an established system, and further on you will find a very simple guide as to how this has been done. So there's information about how she's actually done this. We are born into this life into circumstances over which we have no control, as an acorn drops from the oak tree to the earth below. Give the acorn the correct mixture of sunlight, air, water and earth, and failing other twists of fate, it will attain maturity and realise its full potential. And then she also talks about the fact that the tree, representing, if you like, the spiritual path and the totality of everything, can also be mapped onto us as individuals. So we are the tree. And in fact, the quote on the back of the cards there is, and I see men as trees walking. And here we have a human, a man, androgynous character actually, but she describes it as a he in the book, a man walking as a tree. And she talks about a quote that she's taken from Daniel in the Bible. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed from it. She then talks specifically about this image. On the presentation card, the figure is crowned with the infinite, acknowledging that his position is underneath the guiding principle, even at his own highest point. The light from that principle radiates down to his heart center, symbolized by the sun, where love and light are able to flow through him unobstructed by selfish concerns. The moon is below, reflecting that light through the subconscious to the night side of the earth, beneath his feet, shown as a planet which we know to be one of an infinite number within the cosmos. To the left and right are the active and passive male and female spheres, shown as fruit. Let me find, I've lost my place now. As it is only by recognizing or tasting extremes that their center of similarity can be reached. The two lower spheres, which symbolize the extremes of intellect and emotion, are below his arms, covered by his sleeves, and indicate that he is able to exert control over them. The cards falling from the tree and growing from it like leaves or flowers symbolize the events of our daily life experience, which flutter as if by chance, blown by the winds of fate. So that is a bit of information on that figure. And on the card backs, what she talks here is a little bit about the symbolism of the card back. So the card backs depict the Tree of Life in its traditional colours, with symbols appropriate to the different spheres and flanked by the pillars of mercy and severity to the left and the right. The sphere of Malkuth, earth, is shown as the ground in which the tree is rooted. So that's the last sphere down there. The design emphasises the role of the tree as a composite symbol of man and the universe by its cosmic setting, the macrocosm. She also talks a little bit about the Hebrew letters are arranged around the tree. The border shows the symbols of the four worlds, elements of the suit of the minor arcana, and the wand, cup, sword, and disc at the top of the picture. And then the Hebrew letters around the side start with Aleph, which is related to the Fool at the top left, and move through the major arcana in a clockwise direction. And then there's a list of attributes in here. And then the symbols attributed to the spheres and pillars on the card back are important, because it's probably worth just saying a little bit, for those of you who are not familiar with Kabbalah, what the different symbols mean. So let me just move those over. And so we're going to start with Kether. Well, actually, before we do that, let's start with these symbols here on the Kabbalistic Tarot. This relates to the idea of Ein Sof, the boundlessness, the God's essential nature, if you like, and the essential nature of everything, which is a nothingness from which everything flows. And there's the Ein Sof and the Ein Sof Or, which are all levels of this boundlessness, which then find form, or begin to find form, within Kether, and then downstepping all the way through the different numbers in the Tree of Life, reaching our world at Malkuth. And the idea behind Kabbalism is that this is how creation happens, through these different spheres of energy and spiritual creation, and then we can climb back up the tree as a way of moving from our limited earthbound perspective into a state of enlightenment. And that is what Kabbalism is about, really, and that is how we can look at some of these symbols within the cards. So starting with Kether, this is the crown, and sometimes seen as culmination or kinship, sometimes called the supernal crown, and it relates to the transition from potential to actuality, from the unknowable Ein Sof to God's revealed personality. It's been compared to the point, some Kabbalists compare it to the point where a pen touches the paper before any writing begins. And then we have Chokmah. Now, what she says here is obviously it's a symbol of a crown, because that relates to the crown. And then for Chokmah, she's got the symbols of the zodiac, the attribution of the spheres. It's the stars, and that's Chokmah there. Now, Chokmah is wisdom, the encapsulation of all perfect possibilities before these possibilities unfold. since Chokmah's pristine content is encoded much the way DNA is encoded with a seed, this Sapphira is also referred to as Abba, the supernal father. So what we've got there is a father energy, a male energy. And then moving over here to Bina, this is the Vesica Piscis, and this relates to mother, the womb, the mother of form, Bina. Bina also means understanding, the ability to discern different realities and needs and to respond accordingly. So it's sometimes called the supernal mother. And then this symbol here, Dath, is actually the abyss, they call it in Kabbalah. We'll come to that a bit later, I think. But moving down to Chesed, and the symbol here is the crook, and that relates to the mercy of the king. So sometimes this sphere actually is called Gedula, greatness, the creative force of God's love, the higher expressions of loyalty, kindness, and piety. Then we have Gebura, and that relates to judgment, and the symbol there is the flail. This is in polarity with Chesed, and it indicates the severe king, and it relates to the attribution of fear and karma. And it's sometimes known as judgment, sometimes also called din, and sometimes called judgment, the aspect of God that sets limits and boundaries. It is to din or Gebura is to Chesed what form is to content. It's a manifestation of divine power. Then here we have Tifereth, or Tiferet, depending on how you see it. It's written different ways and how you say it. This is the light within, the solar force, so it's symbolized with the sun, and it's obviously very bright and yellow there. And this relates to beauty, the beauty that emerges when Chesed and Gebura are in balance. In our unredeemed world, Tiferet embodies a yearning for completion and equilibrium. By the way, some of these explanations I'm reading from a book called Cast in God's Image, which is actually a book about Enneagram and Kabbalah. You know that I'm into the Enneagram, by Rabbi Howard Addison. This is actually not so much about mystical Kabbalah, but about Jewish Kabbalah. But it's worth, I think, comparing some of the comparing the comparisons, comparing some of the descriptions, because they really do kind of open things out a bit. So then we have, where are we? Tiferet. So now we move down to Netzach, which is desire, and here we have it's symbolized by the rose. This relates to perfume, attraction, emotional stimulation, the enduring, steadfast nature of God. It filters the divine grace of Gedula, which is Chesed, and helps channel that expansive creative energy into the lower world. So then we have Hod, which is splendor, and this is a wing. That's the symbol that's there. I don't know if you can see that very clearly, but that's actually a wing. And it relates to Mercury, the swift mental functions, divine majesty or splendor. It refracts and conveys the defining energy of Gebura, and to the lower world, and thus keeps the forces of chaos and entropy at bay. And then we have Yesod, which is foundation, and that's symbolized by the moon, the night side of man, the subconscious, also known as Sadik, righteous, because the righteous are the foundation of the world, which is from Proverbs. And Yesod focuses the divine energy from the higher Sephiroth and channels it downward into Malkuth, which is, of course, our world. And what you've got here, the symbol for Malkuth, is roots, where all the higher energies are rooted and acted out as on a stage. And sometimes called Shekinah also as well, accepting presence, God's accepting presence, which receives the Shifa, the divine, sorry, I'm banging the camera, the divine energy, lost my place again. From Tiferet and Yesod, and mediates its blessings to our world. Like Bina, it is a feminine aspect of God, and it is described as a sister or bride. It's the closest Sapphira to our world, and it symbolizes God's nearness, and is also referred to as Malkut, divine sovereignty. And in the book that I'm reading from, Cast in God's Image, there's a wonderful quote which says, Kabbalists have offered a variety of models to explain the mysterious relationship between Ein Sof and the Sephirot, so the different levels. And perhaps, and this author says, perhaps it's best to think of the Sephirot as being similar to a jewel's facets, the different external features of the same gem, the Ein Sof. And that, of course, appeals to me because that really is how I see the tarot. I see the tarot as being a many-faceted jewel that both describes to us ultimate reality and also ourselves, because on some level we are indeed ultimate reality. So what I'm going to do now that we've had that preamble, is I am going to figure out how best to do this. Okay, so starting with the Fool card, and what you'll see in the Kabbalistic Tarot is that very helpfully the Kabbalistic Tarot combines Marseille-based imagery, so you've got the image of the Fool there that is very similar to what you might see in a Marseille deck, with information on which path in the Tree of Life this particular major arcana relates to, because that's how tarot relates to Kabbalah. The 22 paths of the Tree of Life are related to a different major arcana card. So you can use these cards for path working, in other words, doing spiritual development work, which is about moving between the different spheres, the different polarities within the Tree of Life. And then the numbered cards, 1 to 10, relate to the different spheres. So the aces all sit within Kether, the 2s sit within Hokmah, the 10s sit within Malkuth, and so on. And we'll see more of how that works as we go through the deck. I'm not going to go into so much detail in terms of Crowley's Thoth Tarot, other than to say that somebody commented recently on one of my videos to say that I looked a bit like the Fool in the Crowley deck. And I hadn't really thought of that before, but now that they mention it, I had a look and thought, well, apart from not having horns and not being quite as yellow as that, I see what they mean. So I kind of I can't remember who it was that said it now, I'm sorry, but whoever it was, thank you again. I take it as a great compliment because I quite like this card, and slightly uncanny. Anyway, I digress. We're focusing on the wonderful Gill Tarot, and the thing about this one is, I people will say Kabbalah is difficult, it's complicated, and so on. The thing that's great about the Gill Tarot is how accessible it is. The images are bright, they're vibrant, they're playful, they're non-threatening. Even some of the darker cards, although they are dark, there's just something really beautifully inviting about them. So I really love that Fool card. And what you see, of course, is that this Fool card is actually quite reminiscent of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It's much more similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck than it is to the Thoth deck, which is why I think some people get a bit confused when they hear that this is a Kabbalistic deck. I'm just going to bring you in a bit closer. They get confused when they hear that this is a Kabbalistic deck, but it is. There is no doubt about that. So let's proceed, and what I'll do is I will, for some of these cards, I will stop and read a little bit from the guidebook just so that you get a sense of what it's all about. But I'll do that for those that are perhaps a bit different and maybe a bit unexpected. So now we're looking at the Magician, and we'll look at it in each of these 3 decks. And again, this image is very Rider-Waite-Smith, much more similar to Rider-Waite-Smith than it is to Thoth, and we see that this now is the path that we're dealing with, the path from Kether to Bina. And this card, of course, relates to Mercury. Some of the familiar images that you would see in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the lilies and the roses, the 4 different symbols of the suits are there. So the wand and the sword and the cup and the disc are all all there. So moving on to the Priestess, and I think this is a gorgeous card in the Gill Tarot. One of the things I love about this card is there's something a bit unusual about this Priestess card, I think, and that is that we're so used to seeing the Priestess as being the guardian of a portal to something that seems to be hidden from us, the kind of inner world that's hidden from us. But here, she's actually represented as somebody who's standing in the mouth of a or sitting in the mouth of a cave, but it looks as though we are in the cave looking out to the outside world. So it's almost as though we are already in the inner sanctum, and I like that. I think that actually says something really important to us. In fact, I'm so excited by that, I'm going to read you a bit from the book. So, as the magician stands under the white sun in the open air, the priestess is the queen of the night. She symbolises the powers of the subconscious. Her language is the language of symbol or dream. She is seated underground in a hidden cavern of the earth, but at the same time guards the opening to the stars. She is the fount of the stream of consciousness that flows through the tarot, very clearly turning, her robe is turning into water here, and symbolises the flow of timeless awareness that we split into sections and call our allotted time. Reflective like the moon, she mirrors, absorbs, and returns light. She also reflects other things into consciousness, so it's a help to all of us to try and uncover what we store in our own underground caverns. And what she, what Elizabeth Josephine Gill says here about the detail in terms of how it relates to Kabbalah. The priestess is the third or central path from Kether, and so she goes down from here, from Kether through to Tifereth. The Fool connects the Godhead to the outflowing pillar of the force in a matrix of movement. The Fool is there. The Magician connects to the limiting directional pillar of form as a matrix of being. That's there. The Priestess is the start of the middle pillar. Now, in Kabbalistic lore and ceremonial magic, you often hear about the middle pillar ritual. The Priestess is the start of the middle pillar of reconciliation of opposites or balance, the growth of pure consciousness. She flows from Kether to Tifereth, where divine and human consciousness meet in the symbol of the Star of Solomon. This represents in Tifereth the harmonic beauty of the perfected man. The priestess could thus be said to be the virgin mother of the dynamic force of love that is within the sphere of the heart. The word virgin is the union of two root words, virilis, the power of procreation, and gain, a woman. The priestess represents all consciousness as pure, untouched, and complete, yet inwardly self-generating and capable of bringing new life to birth as a channel for the cosmic potential of Kether. Now, I mentioned, did I not, this rather mysterious sphere here, and there's a reference to Thoth here, so I shall speak about it now because it's mentioned. So, on the Tree of Life, her path, there it is, Thoth, her path, and it's also crossed by the path there, is crossed by that of the Empress, over a point where there's said to be an 11th sphere, Thoth or knowledge. This sphere sits between the spheres of wisdom and understanding, to which the paths of the Fool and the Magician lead. But whereas the Magician and Fool lead to these spheres, the priestess passes through knowledge, true knowledge, the knowledge of the divine, and brings it down or connects it with Tifereth. I've lost my place. I'm losing my place because I'm looking at this at the side and then looking back at the cards and looking back at the slide, so bear with. Connects it with Tifereth, the heart sphere, or symbol of the superconscious self, where it can be contacted by the higher levels of consciousness in man. On her breast is a white equal-armed cross to mark the heart sphere and to represent higher and lower, positive and negative polarity, and the equal and balanced status of the four elements in pure knowledge. And there's lots more information, so in the interest of time I won't go into that yet, but isn't that interesting? So lots of, sorry, I'm banging the camera, forgive me. Look at this Empress card. Is that not gorgeous? They're all gorgeous, really. I mean, the Thoth Empress is lovely too. The Empress is a very special card to me, and some of you know why. If you don't, then if you Google for my, or search for my video on the Empress, then you'll know why. But it's beautiful, and look at the size of the Empress. So she makes up the peak of this mountain. So she is not, this is very clear that this is not just a woman that is a human-like woman. This is somebody that is part of the earth, that is very much an archetypal force within the earth. And we shall move on now to the Emperor. I realise that I'm putting these cards on in very random order, but I just want to show you first of all the comparison between the Emperor and the Empress. He also is huge. Look, he is standing on volcanoes. So we're not talking about normal sized people. These are mega archetypal forces. And the Emperor connects Hokmah to Tiphereth. Interestingly, in Aleister Crowley's deck, it's not so much in the deck, but in his thinking, he doesn't put the Emperor there. I think he puts the Emperor between Netzach and Yesod, and Star goes there. So he changed it around. Not the only thing he changed around, of course. Old Al was quite apt to changing things around. Always for good reason. Always for good reason. But the Gill Tarot is sticking pretty much to the standard Kabbalistic process. So that is the Emperor. And I'm going to move a little bit quicker now, just because you've got the gist of how these things all fit together. There we have the Priest or the Hierophant, a lovely image. And then the Lovers. Wonderful Lovers card. Look at the detail there. Look at that angel. Gorgeous Lovers card. We'll probably come back to that when we get to the Devil, because there is much to say. And then we have the Chariot, my birth card, dear to my heart. And again, something to notice here, and we'll see it. Oh dear, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That was Strength. I'm on the wrong deck. Chariot. Something to say here is, again, a bit like the High Priestess card, we're seeing this from a different angle. Normally we see the Chariot facing us head on, and here instead we are to the side of the Chariot, it's moving away from us. So just a reminder, I think, that in the Gill Tarot we are seeing ourselves. So we are seeing things from our own perspective. Moving on, we got a preview of this beautiful Strength card. Of course, in the Crowley deck, when it comes to the 8th card, we actually don't get Strength, we get Justice. So again, something else that actually, there's Justice card number 11, that actually sets the Gill Tarot slightly apart from the Thoth deck, even though it is indeed a Kabbalistic deck. But we do have Strength here, so it's much more Golden Dawn oriented than Thoth oriented. So I'll come back to that. Then the Hermit. Isn't this Hermit card stunning? And again, we are, I think we would say that we are behind the Hermit. Difficult to say because the card is veiled, but I would see that as us standing behind the Hermit looking in that direction. So we are seeing things from the Hermit's own perspective, or from behind the Hermit. So again, a bit like, you know, this card is relating to us. And I've done it again. I put the Wheel of Fortune there when I'm actually meant to be putting the Hermit there. Forgive me. So, a lovely Hermit card. Moving swiftly on. I always say to myself, my videos will be short. They're never short because I just waffle on and on and on. So I'm going to move a bit quicker now because you're seeing the cards, you get the gist. And I do want to say something about a card that is coming up. I nearly put the wrong one in again. So now we're back to Strength, when actually we should be comparing Justice. So there they are. Justice. Okay. Very lively looking Hanged Man in the Gill Tarot. I think it's probably worth saying something about the Hanged Man because he's just so lively and colourful. So what does she say to us about the Hanged Man? This is the path from Gebura, severity, to hod, the mind. It suggests the idea of correction through intellect, mental concepts, and how we view ourselves or use our minds. The letter attributed to it is Mem. This is from the Gill Tarot, so you see that it does relate very closely to Kabbalistic information, which means seas or water, and which links this card with Bina, severe 3, because 1 plus 2 equals 3. The bitter sea, the mother of form, who also heads the pillar of severity of which this path forms part. Water is a reflective surface as well as the source and sustainer of life. So again, that hint at the mirroring aspect of things. And for the Hangman, the chance events of the Wheel of Fortune are the outer forms of the inner expression of the divine. And you see this kind of wheel-like imagery there. And represent man's evolutionary destiny through the wheel's revolutions. He thus turns in the opposite direction, away from total identification with the revolving forms, toward the centre. The hub of inner meanings which turns the wheel. Those first seen obvious things of matter he places last. The last seen more veiled intimations of spirit he places first. For this reason he is seen hanging by one foot from a rose at the centre of a cross made from a living tree. This symbolises the rose of the spirit, which is situated at the tensional centre of the equal armed cross of the four elements in created life. And it's probably worth saying here that, of course, the back of the Thoth deck, although it's not an equal armed cross, this is the rosy cross, the idea of the rose of the spirit in the middle of a symbol for man, and also, one might argue, a symbol for man's suffering, if you want to use that word, certainly stability within or instability within the material world. So the idea of spirit emerging from this material plane. Okay, so that is the Hangman. So now, Death. Wow, look at this Death card. Oh, gorgeous. Just beautiful. Oh, wrong one. There we are. Death. So, in the Gill Tarot, stunning. You kind of see very clearly the angel-based imagery of the Death card here. Also looks a bit like one of the Black Riders from Lord of the Rings or something, but just a wonderful, powerful Death card. Okay, Temperance. And I actually want to say something about this, because what you'll see is that in the Gill Tarot, although we're used to this being Temperance, it's been renamed. It's not Temperance, it's Temperar. So let's see what she has to say about Temperar. This card is usually known as Temperance, but as that is understood today, it does not help to convey the meaning of the picture. I have therefore used the Latin root word temperar, which means to combine properly, which forms the words tempering, as in steel, temperature, relative heat and cold, and temperament, the combination of the four elements within the self. Following the card of death, where something dies and something new is reborn, this card suggests the reformation of a new consciousness through the tempering effect of the fires and waters of experience, rather as pig iron becomes fine steel. The angel in the illustration is a symbol of the higher self, as in the Lovers, but here is initiating these events and experiences to strengthen the lower vessel. In a layout, you could assume the promise of change in the sphere in which it appears, but to or through circumstances or a period of time that will test your weaknesses. And this card relates to the link between Temperance relates, or Temperar relates to the link between Tifereth, the Christ centre or superconscious self, and Yesod, the sphere of the subconscious. It is therefore illustrative of the connection between our hidden self, the foundation, and the higher or perfected self. The subconscious is the sphere directly above Malkuth, or the conscious or seen self, and the middle pillar of the Tree of Life. So that path continues or constitutes the middle section of the direct path between the primal cause in Kether and physical man in Malkuth. So a bit like the High Priestess bridged that part of the journey, Temperance bridges that part of the journey. And we'll come to the next part of the journey soon. Interesting stuff. So moving on again. isn't this interesting? I mean, I think Kabbalah is, I can understand why some people find it a little bit inaccessible and scary, because it does seem complicated. But when you realize it is a system, and that system, every part of the system has meaning, and the intention is to show how things fit together, and you can move down the tree. That's how life is and reality is created. But you can also consciously move up the tree. And in fact, just to give you a sneak preview, in the Gill Tarot, she provides this excuse me, Tree of Life layout guide, where you actually lay the cards out in this order, and you start off by reading them in reverse. So you start with the 10 and then the 9, and you read them as though you are traveling up the Tree of Life, and then you read them again from the top down. And this gives you both an idea of how your issue relates to path working upwards towards a higher reality, a higher self, but then also how the higher self is impacting and influencing the way that you live your life. So we'll come to that later. So there we have the Devil, and as again with the Rider-Waite deck, I think it's fairly clear that there are links between the Devil and the Lovers, you know, in terms of how they look and how they're laid out. Yeah, there we are. Nothing more to say on that, really. Moving on now to the Tower, one of the darker cards. Oh, the wrong one. More Lord of the Rings, not influences, because I'm not sure that Crowley would have been influenced by Tolkien, but certainly a connotation for me is thinking of the Eye of Sauron when you see the tower. Fairly traditional looking tower there. But look at the size of these people. So the tower is there and is being shattered. But the people they're not really falling out of the tower, are they? They're kind of suspended on either side of it. Maybe they've been ejected this way. But it kind of emphasizes that within the tarot, far from being a small, insignificant creature, you, the subject of readings, you know, you're it. You are big in the tarot. Now we have the Star. Lovely Star card. Oh, now that's me doing the wrong thing again by putting the Moon there. Oh dear, dear, dear. I can't really edit these out, because if I edited it out, then it would just be chaos. So you're just seeing it, warts and all. And we're just going to move swiftly on to the Moon, since you've had a preview of the Moon. I love the Moon card in... Oh, I'm about to do it again. I keep wanting to put 2 Gill Tarot cards out. Stop it, Brian, stop it! So there's the Moon. Isn't that a lovely, lovely image? So there's the Sun. And Judgment. And of course in the Crowley deck, Judgment is the Eon. Wonderful colours. And a much more accessible Judgment card than you sometimes see, because you know, these guys don't look like cadavers that have just been lifted out of their coffins like they do in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So interesting. And then here is the path that relates from Yesod to Malkuth. So the last kind of down step in this middle pillar is, of course, the world. And then you see that cross again, the cross of matter and spirit, and you are at the center of that cross. You are that. You are the world. The world is you. That is what the Tarot is telling us. That's what the Gill Tarot is telling us. That's what Kabbalah is telling us. You are the Tree of Life. The world and reality is the Tree of Life. You are the middle pillar. You are all of it. So there we have the major arcana. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just shift these aside, and we're going to start looking at the minors and of course the courts. So bear with me. What you can see now is that in the Kabbalistic Tarot, because it's the ace, you relate to the first sphere, Kether, and indicates to us here that this is fire, and that part of Kether, that quadrant of Kether, is the fire quadrant, and it relates to the Atzolith, which is the first of the Kabbalistic worlds, and so really that's how the Kabbalistic deck takes us through. And what you'll see in both the Gill Tarot and in the Thoth Tarot is that these are not illustrated pips, but they're not exactly pips, but they're not illustrated in the sense that Rider-Waite-Smith is. You'll see that they are they're not pictures of people and scenes, but they are artistic representations of the numbers, and we'll come on to that in a second. And yeah, that's probably the best way to proceed, is just to go through them all. So you will see some in the Gill Tarot, you'll see some figures, but mainly you will see just the actual suit representation, the wands, the cups, and so on. Now, something else to notice, that in the Gill Tarot and the Thoth Tarot we have keywords. The keywords are sometimes the same, but they're sometimes not, and that's one of the things that's quite interesting to reflect upon when we're looking at these decks. And you can make up your own mind about whether which of the keywords you like, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. Some people I know don't like keywords and find them a bit off-putting. What I find nice about the Gill Tarot is that the keywords are part of the picture. So unlike the Thoth deck, where they are separate to the painting, they are built into the painting in the Gill Tarot, so they're intrinsic to it. And for some reason that makes me like them more than I do in the Thoth deck. I always find the keywords in the Thoth deck rather limiting, and I prefer decks that don't have keywords really. But in the Gill Tarot I like it. I do really like it. Now somebody, I think it was someone on the Eclectic Tarot forum many years ago, described the pips of the Gill Tarot as being like Sesame Street pips because of using the keyword and the illustrated numbers, like, you know, the count 1, 2, 3, you know, that was Count Dracula meant to be in Sesame Street. But I don't think that's a problem. I like them. I don't find them obtrusive. I actually think they're very playful. And here we see our first diversion. So we've got Virtue in the Thoth deck, but Enterprise in the Gill Tarot. So I'm going to actually move fairly quickly through these because there's only so much one can say about them, other than to ask you to consider for yourselves whether you relate to these representations or whether you're finding them limiting. I like the fact that some of the more negative connotations in the Thoth deck are given slightly more positive inferences in the Gill Tarot, because the idea of strife, the idea of striving, might be a better way of putting that. Endeavour and striving are kind of synonymous, but strife makes you think of trouble. Not to say that it isn't about trouble. It is a 5 after all. We know the 5s are problematic cards in tarot. Victory. The nice thing about this deck is it does give you clear guidance as to what the astrological attributions are. I'm now being embarrassed by the fact that I said there are no people in these pip cards, but there are people in the in the Gill deck. Oh, hang on, the camera is about to plummet earthwards. Excuse me 1 second while I adjust the camera, otherwise you are going to get a rude awakening when it falls out of its holder. So there are people on the Gill Tarot, but not very many of them. And again, we see a keyword that is synonymous, so Valor. Then we have Speed and Swiftness. Preparation. Strength, the 9 of Wands, and then the 10 of Wands, Oppression in both. Now, interestingly, we're going on to the court card, so we're starting with the kings, or the knights as they... Ooh, Brian, get a grip on yourself. The The kings in the Kabbalistic and the Gill Tarot relate to the knights in the Thoth deck. Fire of Fire is what we've got here. The fiery king and the suit of fire. Fire of Fire, you see? And remember we said this was Hokmah over here was the supernal father. I read that to you a little bit ago. And so the kings, naturally enough, sit within the supernal father. You'll find that the queens relate to the supernal mother, Bina. Speaking of which, here we have the Queen of Fire, the Queen of Wands, and yes, relating to Bina. The Knights relate to Tifereth, so they are moving us down, or the prince in these. Here we go again. The prince in the Thoth and Gill Tarot. So we're in Tifereth now, so we've moved down the middle pillar. So the supernal father and mother have combined to create the prince, and the prince is in this kind of this part of the deck that is still not in our world, hasn't quite got to our world, but we do get to our world, bang, into Malkuth with the page, or the princess as they are in the Thoth and the Gill decks. So it's the same drill. You know, we're in Kether again, but we're in a different part of Kether. We're in the watery part of Kether. We're in Berea now. That's the world that the cups relate to. And there we have the Ace of Cups. We don't have a keyword for the Ace of Cups or the aces in the Thoth deck, but we do in the Gill deck. Love. All you need is love. Speeding up now. If you want to watch any of these in detail, you're going to have to pause because we've got to get moving. Joy and abundance. Interesting contrast here. So the Four of Cups here is satiety, and that doesn't look terribly appealing. It looks like the kind of green slime that you might think is inside you if you eat so much that you're more than sated. But here it's luxury. So interesting contrasts. It's not always, even in Kabbalah, there is not agreement always about exactly how these things fit together. So it's for you to make up your own mind. What does Moon in Cancer mean to you, for example? And now we're going into Mars in Scorpio. So not surprisingly, we're talking about regret and disappointment. And then Sun in Scorpio. Oh, satisfaction, pleasure. Aren't these lovely cards? I love the Gill deck. I like the size of it as well. Nice card stock, not overly laminated. Beautiful colours. Look at that imagination. Now, the Seven of Cups, of course, in the Rider-Waite deck is the one where you've got the person trying to choose between all these weird cups, and there is a little dragon in there. Well, the dragon is here. Well and truly here. Let me just read you a little bit because we haven't picked on the suits, have we? So let me just tell you what it says. So we're on, what are we on? We're on Cups, Seven of Cups. So here we go. Imagination. A dragon is shown entwined around a figure 7 that contains 7 cups and is placed on an emerald green background, the colour of Bria in Netzach. So we're in that world, Bria in Netzach. Cups represent the soulful emotional level, and coupled with Netzach, the seat of the desire nature, it is a powerful card. In the same way, imagination is a powerful force. It can take us down to the lower serpent levels in the form of violent and lust-filled fantasies, or it can fly to the visionary when the reptile is given wings, rise as a dragon, and take us where the purely earthbound cannot. Now, notice, by the way, that the meaning of the card then is derived from the type of the world that we are in, Berea, which is the emotional based world, and Netzach, which is the sphere that this relates to. That's how the meaning of these cards are being kind of derived in Kabbalistic lore. So it's interesting to see how the system works. Okay, Eight of Cups, instability, indolence. And we have a Nine of Cups, content. I love this card. Look at that lovely little face. Nine of Cups, happiness. Jupiter in Pisces. I mean, no wonder that is a happy card. Mars in Pisces. Success. And here we have satiety. So we had satiety earlier, you remember, in this deck. Let's see if I can find it again. Can you remember which one it was? Number 4. So interesting that those keywords are the same but for different cards. So success, satiety. You can see the link. King of Cups, inspiration. Queen of Cups, contemplation. Knight of Cups, creativity. And again, keywords for the court cards here, but not in the Thoth deck. And then Princess of Cups, evolution. And those are the cups. Now I'm going to go on to the swords, and I think when we do the swords I will read you something about one of the court cards, because we haven't done a court card yet. Ace of Swords. 2 of Swords, peace. Wonderful. Oh no, hang on. Hang on just a minute. Something is not right here, because I have obviously put my cups where I shouldn't have put my cups. So let's go back a bit. Ace of Swords, spot the deliberate mistake. Ace of Swords. 2 of Swords, peace. I'm not very peaceful. I'm making a right hash of this. 3 of Swords. No, 2 of Swords, peace. We're still on the 2. Come on, Brian. 3 of Swords, sorrow. You're not kidding. 4 of Swords, rest. That's a lovely card, isn't it? Truce. I'm going to read something about this because look, there is a very clear similarity in terms of the imagery. So what does the Gill Tarot say about truce? Trying to find the page. Here it is. 4 swords are constructed into a figure 4 that rests or balances on clouds against the star-filled background of the deep purple of Yetzirah in Chesed. Did you hear my stomach rumble there? It just rumbled. Swords represent the will and mentation. Chesed represents the outflowing of the mercy of God. When the self orients as a receptor for this mercy, the will rests, subjecting its directive, active function in obedience to the true balance of cosmic wisdom, represented by the narrow point on which rests the equal armed cross formed by the swords. The point of balance is above the clouds of illusion and is set within the context of the starry universe. A flower opens at the central point, representing the flowering of the inner self within this resting of the will, which is a bit like the flower of the rose on the back of the Thoth deck. The flower, however, is a poppy which has addictive properties associated with sleep, the extremity of rest. The wills of the bigot, hypocrite, glutton and tyrant can never truly rest because they are always in the service of their habit, the need to maintain constantly the artificial constructs by which they live. This way of life is habit forming to the extent that it is repeated constantly, leading the self to a view of itself to which it becomes so addicted that it can recognize no other possibility. It thus falls asleep to the possibility of resting in the arms of a wiser and greater will than itself. So, always double-edged swords. Loss. Defeat. Change. Science. Uncertainty, futility. Conflict, interference. And we know what's coming. We don't like this one, do we? Nine of Swords. Despair or cruelty. Self-cruelty, perhaps. Ten of Swords. Desolation. Ruin. And now I'm going to say something about the King of Swords. Intuition. Because we haven't actually said anything about any of the court cards yet, and I think we should. So what does the Gill Tarot tell us about the court cards? So we're on swords, aren't we? So King of Swords, intuition. The King of Swords holds a sword point upward, apparently as a lightning conductor. You see everything? It is a reflection of the downward pointing sword in the ace. In contrast to the robust King of Wands and the aesthetic King of Cups, the King of Swords seems alert, even tense. He sits above the clouds of illusion on a throne of feathers in a windy, lightning-filled sky. The lightning symbolises the energy and power of Absoluth, in the element of air, which is Yetzirah, which is fire and air. Yetzirah also represents mentation and will. The king therefore shows the highest level of mental functioning, the flash of intuition. Intuition is often associated with feeling, but not in the watery emotional sense. It is more aptly described as a sensitive connection with an inner knowing, though not necessarily a knowing why. Now I want to just contrast that with the Queen, who is here relating to reason. Now the reason I want to contrast it is that here is an interesting point. And I know that this is a generalization, but I would suspect that if you said to many people in tarot circles, of the King and Queen of Swords, which of them relates to reason and which to intuition? I reckon a lot of people would say, oh, well, the Queen is intuition because that's a feminine quality, and reason, that's a masculine quality, so it's the king. But here it's the other way around. The Queen is reason and the king is intuition. And so on the Queen it says, the Queen of Swords is red-haired like her husband to indicate vibrant activity and is dressed in blue to symbolise intelligence. A symbol of alchemy is beside her cloudy throne to show that her reasoning is not based purely on the intellectual or scientific, but encompasses all levels, including the qualities of soul and compassion, something material science is apt to forget. She's the symbol of the Briatic level, does not forget. Though being queen of the suit of the will and mental processes, she synthesises two modes of being. One problem with our reception of the king's intuition is that it is often difficult for us to know whether what we feel is a true intuitive message or an instinctive liking or disliking based on subjective or lower levels. Thus, the proper wife for intuition is reason, the application of the mind's power for drawing conclusions and determining truth. So I think that's a rather lovely representation of those cards. Moving on, the Knight of Swords or the Prince of Swords is action. Let me just get, poor old Thoth is getting shoved off to the side here. I hope you can see all of that. Control, in the words of Janet Jackson. So those are the swords, and I'm now going to move them away, and I'm going to try to not put them in the wrong pile so that I then can't find the final suit, which of course is our lovely suit of earth. And you know, this is, oh, and I've just put it onto the wrong pile. I knew that would happen. Okay, I am recovered. We're now looking at the suit of earth, and this is the suit that's going to bring us slap bang into Malkuth, our world, and I'll show you exactly how that works in a second. So first of all, we have the Ace of Discs relating to wealth, and then 2, now because we're coming down, remember we started off at 1 and now we're in 2, Hokmah, and we're in the earthy part of Hokmah, down at the, indicated down at the bottom there. Then we have unity or change, 2 sides of duality. Unity always exists in duality, but it appears to be not united, so hence the change, the constant flux. Then we have gain or works. Order, power. Adaptation or worry. And again, a good indication that, you know, when things are not good and we're worried, what good does worry do? It's about a call to adapt, a call to change the things you can change and accept the things you can't change and all that kind of stuff. Quite nicely illustrated in the Gill Tarot. Well-being and success. Now, success was a key word in a previous card, but here we've got it in the Six of Pentacles in Thoth, but well-being in Gill, and then the Seven of Discs, delay or more severely in Thoth, failure, and then skill, prudence, which I think is a kind of skill. Oh, and now we have prudence and gain. So gain was a keyword elsewhere. So some of them are swapped around. Interesting to speculate why that would be. And again, to think about which do you agree with. Now look, you see that we are now in Yesod, or we were in Yesod for the 9, and now we are heading into Malkuth. So with the 10s, we are in Malkuth. We are coming right down to earth with prosperity and wealth. And then when we look at, that's in the pip card, and then if you look at the courts, the supernal father, the king of earth, king of discs, wonderful colours. The court cards in the Gill for the earth suit are just lovely. So they're not just kind of brown and green and earthy, which they are in many decks. They are rainbow coloured. Just look at how beautiful that queen is. Lovely. And so we're in Bina, the supernal mother, and then Bina and Hokmah give birth to Tifereth. That's where the knight sits. Construction, getting ready to come into manifestation. And then from Tifereth down stepping into Malkuth with the Princess of Pentacles. Growth in the Gill Tarot. So there we have it. That is a saunter through the Gill Tarot, the Kabbalistic Tarot, and the Thoth deck. And just to close, what I would say is that, you know, the great thing about the Gill Tarot is you can go into the level of detail that I have only touched on here in terms of how you downstep between the different levels of the Tree of Life. Or you can go into virtually no detail and just go by the images and the keywords, because you can see, I think, that it is a very intuitive deck. And if you like this artwork, and I do, then I think you'll find it extremely attractive and interesting and well worth your time. So I'll put the links below for where you can get all of these materials plus the books I've recommended, and I hope you found this useful, and I am absolutely delighted that the Gill Tarot has been re-released. It's been on my wish list forever, and having it to enjoy is just an absolute thrill. So thank you US Games, and thank you Elizabeth Josephine Gill for what I think is a very special deck. So take care everyone, and I'll see you all again very soon.